publicity by the White House. But given Zelikow position, any investigation of the White House would have been carried out by, essentially, the White House itself. A more accurate way to put it was that as the White House's inside man on the commission, Zelikow was in position to make sure that the White House, along with the CIA, the FBI, the Pentagon, and the Justice Department, was not investigated. Once we understand this, we will not be surprised by the Commission's omissions.
Christina Borgerson is the author of Into the Buzzsaw, Leading Journalists Expose the Myth of a Free Press, a collection of stories about reporters who acted courageously and discovered that no good deed goes unpunished. She's won an Emmy and a Murrow Award for investigative reporting. Christopher Scheer is the co-author of The 5 Biggest Lies Bush Told Us About Iraq. He co-authored the Oscar-nominated script for the film Nixon. Paul Thompson has compiled the world's most compendious resource of mainstream press stories about the events of 9/11, the complete 9/11 timeline, at cooperativeresearch.org. Finally, Dr. Robert Bowman, an old friend of mine, by the way, a man who flew 101 combat missions as a fighter pilot in Vietnam, and who today takes a stand against war. He headed the Star Wars programs under Ford and Carter and then opposed them under Reagan. He now heads the Institute for Space and Security Studies. Welcome, everyone. Let me start with Dr. Bowman. What is your assessment of the film clip about the Project for a New American Century that we just saw? Do these guys really have that much influence?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, this bunch not only drew up a plan for the foreign policy of the United States, they also drew up a plan for the foreign policy of Sharon's Likud government of Israel. Both of these plans, drawn up by largely the same people, included regime change in Iraq as a central element. And as the clip noted, they acknowledged it couldn't happen. The American people wouldn't allow it unless there was a new Pearl Harbor. And that is what 9/11 was.
If I could clarify, he's referring to a paper that came out in 1996 called A Clean Break, which was written for Benjamin Netanyahu, the just newly elected Israeli prime minister. And it's written by, I believe, Douglas Feith and a number of the people who are lately involved in this Israeli spy scandal. So David Wormser is another one. So that these, the neocons, we refer to them, actually gave advice to Sharon and also pretty much the same people in the Project for the New American Century.
Paul, what about 9/11? Why is anyone doubting it? Weren't all the real questions cleared up by the 9/11 Commission?
We can see so many instances of conflicts of interest. For instance, Philip Zelikow, who is the executive director, and he was the person who is in charge of figuring out who the witnesses are going to be, where the evidence, and what evidence they were going to look at. He co-wrote a book with Condoleezza Rice, the national security advisor, and has so many ties with the Bush administration. He was part of the transition team, so he actually had to be interviewed by his own commission because he himself was involved in so much of what went on before 9/11. And all of the commissioners are very compromised by conflicts of interest. Quite a few of them are working with legal teams that represent United Airlines or American Airlines. I think half the commissioners. So that's one problem. Another problem is that the final report was supposed to be a unanimous report. So that means that if there was a single commissioner who had any objection about anything, that fact would be dropped from the report. So there is literally nothing in the 9/11 report that the Bush administration did not approve of.
The number of omissions is staggering. For example, they begin the book with a discussion of the hijackers, giving the same 19 that have been named from the beginning. They fail to point out that 6 of those hijackers have shown up alive. They also discuss Muhammad Atta, describing him as a fanatic Muslim, obviously so devout he was ready to meet his maker. They omit the fact, as Daniel Hupsicker has revealed, that Atta was very fond of alcohol, pork, and lap dances. They hardly discuss the World Trade Center collapses. They do not discuss the fact that fire has never brought down a high-rise steel frame building. They do not discuss the fact that the collapses had 10 characteristics that are common to controlled demolitions. They do not even mention the collapse of building number 7, and of course, therefore, the comment by Larry Silverstein, the one who had a lease on it, that he and the fire department decided to pull it, that is, have it brought down by explosives. They do not discuss the removal of the steel, which would have covered up any evidence of explosives. With regard to the crash into the Pentagon, they ignore several of the most puzzling questions, assuming the official theory. That is, why would terrorists have struck the West Wing, which was being renovated, so it had very few people, and when all the top brass and Rumsfeld were in the East Wing? They do not discuss the fact that photos taken by the Associated Press and even by a Marine show that up till 30 minutes after the building was allegedly hit by a 757 going 400 some miles an hour, the facade had not collapsed. They don't discuss the fact that these photos show that the hole that was created was very tiny, that no Boeing could have gone inside of it. They don't mention that photos show there was no Boeing outside the Pentagon. They don't mention that the Pentagon's anti-missile system should have brought down any commercial airline coming near the Pentagon. With regard to Bush's behavior that day, they do not force the question as to why the Secret Service did not whisk him away when there should have been fear that he would be one of the terrorist targets. They do not discuss the most specific of the advance warnings. They did not ask Ashcroft what was the warning he got so that he would no longer fly commercial airplanes. They do not mention David Schipper's report that prior to 9/11 he tried to inform Ashcroft that several members of the FBI were telling him that they knew that attacks were scheduled for that time in Lower Manhattan. They do discuss the put options, but they dismiss it, saying, "We found that the man who bought most of the United Airlines put options had no conceivable connection to Al-Qaeda, therefore he could have had no foreknowledge." This is a perfect example of how the official theory dictated what evidence was relevant. With regard to the claim that we were hunting bin Laden prior to 9/11, the Commission fails to mention that he reportedly showed up in July before 9/11 in a hospital in Dubai, where he was treated by an American doctor, visited by the local CIA agent, and the head of Saudi intelligence. They ignore the testimony of Abu Zubaydah, the Al-Qaeda operative who reported that 3 members of the Saudi royal family had advanced knowledge that there would be attacks on America on 9/11, and that a Pakistani general also had this knowledge. Testimony that tended to be verified by the fact that all 4 of those men ended up dead within a few months. With regard to the Saudi flights that Michael Moore made well known in his movie, based on Craig Unger's book, the Commission claims there was nothing wrong with the flight on